Welcome to Kingdom vs. New Vengeance new update, Pirate King. Now, this is a new update for Vengeance DLC update that I'm gonna be talking about. Now, as much as I like to talk about the Alliance, I'll wait until the Halloween update comes out. But anyway, this update introduced a new hero, a new tower, 5 new bosses, and plenty of new enemies, and I'll be excited to talk about it. So, let's get into it. Yarr! First we're gonna be talking about is our two new allies. One is the hero and the other is tower. As usual, let's go with the hero first. The first hero is Lucerna, and she's pretty much like a flying hero unit. And this is what the stats look like at max level. 666 max health, 37 to 57 damage, magic resistance, and 27. So she's pretty much the first hero with magic resistance. Her passive ability is the ghostly apparition, and what this does is that she will pretty much like teleport. It's much like Azra's teleport or Jack's teleport. Nothing usual. Now, let's move on to the ability. The first one is the Scurvy Visage, and what this does is it's pretty much like the Fear of the Dragon for Parasite. She will go to the pet and scare some enemies. A pretty good way to, well, basically make enemies go back. Basically like a teleport ability. Next ability is Fire All Guns, and this is her AoE ability. What this does is under the pad she will basically launch if there's a lot of enemies. Now these cannons will do a lot of damage, so it's really nice damage output if you plan her ahead. The third ability is the Damned Crew, and this is her pretty much like the unit ability. These ghost crews have like 120 HP and deal like 10 to 20 damage. Not impressive, but since you could pretty much summon like 2 of these, it's a pretty nice way to block certain enemies, and it has a short cooldown. And final ability is the Pirate Pillage, and what this does is if she starts shooting, she will get like 3 gold per hit, and this comes from 10, 20 to 40% each. And this is a nice way to get money, and she's probably one of the better heroes who can make money outside Blackthorn from Frontiers. And it's a nice gold, like, it's a nice way to get a lot of gold, which is a really nice ability. And finally, her hero spell. Her hero spell ability is the Cursed Colors, and what this does is that if you plant this totem, it will start possessing like units, and this is incredibly overpowered ability, especially if you use it right, because you could pretty much just use it and the enemies will fight each other. It's basically like possession with the mausoleum, though it has a cooldown and all. And you can also nicely use it as a Ulok's teleport hero spell ability. So overall, what do I think of Lucerna? Well, I would definitely say she's a very powerful flying hero. She's certainly not a dragon, but she is close to it. I almost consider her as almost like the second most overpowered hero. But there's a lot of like in the community that disagrees with me. But that's mainly because she can create a lot of gold and possess a lot of target. Her only like downside is that she heals slow. But overall and she's also has a long range. So what do I think of her overall? Well, She's probably the first magic resistant hero in the series, and she is a very powerful of a hero, so you should like try this out. Alright, let's move on to the tower, which is the ogre shipwreck. And this is a very like unique tower. It's basically like the Deep Devil's Reef, except it isn't just it's not just like the direct and a range tower, but the final upgrade makes it also like an artillery tower. So it's basically a 3 tower at once. At level 1 it's already very powerful. Start out summoning a single ogre, and once you upgrade it, you gain a goblin. Then the 3rd level you gain pretty much like the orc with muskets as a range tower, and finally it basically becomes an artillery tower. Now, let's move to the abilities. Start out, we got the better crew. Now what this does is that it pretty much like increases both the ogres and the goblin stats, so that the ogre like comes with 57 to 85 with 277 and 105 damage, along with low armor, 30%, 20, I don't know. Goblin deckhand basically gains from 30 to 80 damage, all the way to 70 to 23 damage with low armor. And what do I think of this ability? Well, it's very similar to the Deep Devil's Reef Chosen of the Sea, except that it's not good. Like, the ogre and the goblin are very tanky, and I only recommend you're using it against boss battles. So I just only recommend you only using it for boss battles, as it has a cheap price, but I recommend for the other 2 abilities, which I'll talk about. Next up I got the musket range and the goblin launcher, but I go for the musket range. It's pretty much like Barge for this tower, which basically turns the ranged tower into a DPS tower. It also has a pretty cheap price, and I highly recommend getting that. Then you pretty much get the goblin launcher, which pretty much summons a goblin per 50 to 10 seconds, but I only recommend getting like tier 1 ability. Now the musket will do pretty high damage while it summons like a 3rd unit at any range. I don't recommend using at campaigns like the Primal Ravage or the Winter stages with the goblin, but overall I'd certainly recommend getting like musket range at max and the goblin launcher at max. So what do I think of the ogre shipwreck? It's possibly the most overpowered tower in this game that they introduced, and it is extremely powerful. The only downside are the armored enemies, maybe flying enemies, but you can negate this. It is also fairly expensive, but the price is worth it, and all of the 3 can do the highest damage in the game on hit, which is extremely worth to get this. So then, let's get on to the enemies right now. Now, moving on to the enemies, and this is probably the most interesting enemy introduction, as each section will have like different teams' enemies. And the first enemies I'm gonna be talking about is the Scoundrel, and this one has like the basic stat, 300 health, 10 to 50 damage. It's pretty much like the standard boring like humanoid enemies, and there's nothing special about it, just block. He has pretty high health, but overall they're basically like the basic grunts. Now, the second enemy are the Buccaneers. And these are pretty much like the Buccaneers you see from Frontiers. You know, those like ranged pirate barrack that you use it to get like these hooded men. Now, they do 8 to 12 damage and have 360 health. But the damage is kinda misleading, as they are doing like fire damage. And they're possibly doing much higher damage than it seems. So overall they're basically like these stronger range enemies in this game. I'm not sure if they do true damage, but I think it's physical. But overall, just range enemies. Next up we got the Corsair. And these are pretty much like the Corsairs from Frontiers. However, these one have like high damage, high health, and interesting low armor. And instead of pretty much like stealing money, the Corsairs in this game are pretty much like fighting you, and then they start like drinking, gaining health. And while it does say regenerate health, it's more like healing themselves. So they're basically like paladins of sorts. But overall magic damage or any form of physical, high DPS physical towers can handle this, so you shouldn't be fearful for them. And then we got the boat swine, and much like in Kingdom Rush Frontiers, these are pretty much like these fat anchormen you're dealing with. They do pretty high damage in this game, and are pretty much like the tankiest giant enemy in Vengeance standards. And much like in game, they do AoE damage, so pretty much use any tanky unit as you can find. They do take a lot of damage, but you can do physical or high magic damage, so you could pretty easily shred them off. But overall, I recommend doing high damage runs to kill. Now we got the Bomber's Barret, the first flying enemy, and possibly the most annoying until the second one. And these are pretty much like the Bomber Parrots you also see from Frontiers, from these specific like pirate muskets that were helping. But in this game, instead of basically just throwing high DPS bombs, they would start gaining speed, and they're pretty fast and gain a lot of speed. And your best bet is to pretty much have like high DPS. Make sure that they don't target the barracks or any block units. So all you need to do is like just kill them before they engage with barracks. And even if you get barracks, hope that their low health dies quickly, because they're one of the most annoying enemies in the game. Now, moving on to the second stage, we're introduced to the monkeys. The first one is the Russian monkeys, and these are pretty much like hyena enemies. Like, they could be pretty much like this one monkey from Frontiers, from the jungle stages from Bananas, but in this game they're like hyenas. If you try to block them, they gain speed, except near the exit. So make sure you have high damage or a pretty good artillery tower. And they're like the second most annoying enemy in this game, as you cannot block them. But they have low health, so make sure to kill them as fast. Later on they come in huge groups, so artillery can handle them. Now, moving on to the second monkey enemy, we got the filibusters. And this one are like, they have pretty good damage and pretty decent health. However, they're split between two enemies. Like, if you start killing them, they'll pretty much split into the monkeys and the second like monkey. But this one is a lot weaker filibuster than the than before you killed it. So if you kill it fast enough, you basically have a slightly weaker unit to deal with. But overall, just make sure to block them. Usually the monkey is the one that's more annoying to deal with. Then we got the boom baboon, and this one is an interesting enemy, as they basically if they get contact with the barracks, they explode, and they also kill themselves and turn into monkeys. So even though they might not seem difficult, they have pretty good speed, and if you don't kill them, they're gonna like split into monkeys. Like, they're extremely tanky and do high damage, but if you can like block them with a tanky unit, they will die instantly. But if without it, they're basically just a tankier monkey, and they also split themselves apart. So kind of an annoying enemy to deal with. Moving on with we got the Great Maav, or do you say it? It's a flying unit, and it's pretty much like the other 3 monkeys I mentioned. If you kill them, they're basically turned to monkeys. And this one can be very annoying at the heroic stages because of their bulk, and they can split to monkeys. But if you can kill them fast enough with good harassers or bone flingers, they usually go in no time. And they're basically like the tanky flying enemies. You can already see that these monkey enemies are getting annoying. But then we got the other 2 monkeys. The first one, we got the ape mate. Now this enemy reminds me heavily of the gorillas from Frontiers, as in Frontiers they kinda introduce the centaurs, and you also get the pirates, which begs the interesting lore question. So what do these monkeys do? Well, they got 2000 health, almost as much as the Yeti, 130 to 160 area damage, medium armor, and can boost allies. And these can be very threatening, especially in final stage, which I'll get to later. And they're pretty tanky, can shrug a lot of hits, but if you can kill them, it's usually good, because not only are the enemies doing like 50% more damage, but they also gain a lot of speed. So they're a kinda annoying enemy to deal with, but if you can basically insta-kill them, they're usually a no problem. Now let's move on to the final monkey we have. We got the tail blade, or baboons. And this one have like a range attack, which sometimes adds poison on hit. And they also can dodge melee attack. And they do quite a lot of high damage, and they're also incredibly fast. But if you can kill them, they basically the best strategy is either just block it with be tank with range attacks, or just melee them, though they seem to dodge melee attack, and they later come in groups, so well, that's kinda it. They only appear like in 2 stages, but they can be tricky to deal with. But overall, just do high damage. Nothing else to say. Now, the first stages introduce the sharks. And what I'm gonna say is that every shark enemy is gonna have their own unique ability. They're like trolls or the demons from the first Kingdom Rush, where all of them have like the same ability. The first one is the lemon shark slasher, or the lemon shark. And they're all gonna have like different like names with different shark species. Now, the lemon shark is the first one. It has 240 health but does a lot of high damage. And on hit they can pretty much like heal. It's pretty much like Margos's like passive heal ability. If you start blocking them, they will start healing. So low level barracks will do nothing against them. But if you do like high damage with them, they're gonna die fast. And overall, they're like the introduction of the basic enemies. And they only appeared in this stage. So overall, they're very tanky and all, but with high DPS or without barracks, they die pretty easily. Now, moving on to the second enemy. We got the Bull Shark Dasher, or as I like to call them, Bug Sharks. Now, these are like the medium armored enemies, and much like the Lemon Shark, they will steal your life on bite, on hit. However, they also can swim underground, so they're like those like Dwarven miners, where they go underground and go in high speeds. And the best way you can deal with them is magic towers or high physical towers. And they can be very tanky enemies to deal with, especially with lifesteal. But overall just do high damage. Next up we got the Tiger Shark Rager. And these are like the fast enemies that like they do like the highest DPS. They hit like 3 times. And they basically gain, not only do they do true damage, but when they're close to another tiger shark, they like get damage boost. So they're like those gnolers, or what you call them from Origin. And they can be very annoying enemy to deal with as they bypass armor completely, but your best bet is to do high damage. So overall, very annoying enemy to deal with, but high damage is good enough. Finally, we got the Hammer Mage, and this is the first magic resistant enemy. It does like high magic damage, range attack damage. They can also have like an area stun for unit and stun towers, much like the Black Surges from Frontiers. Now, they're basically just as annoying, except they can't like go into shells, but they can stun if there's like 2 more units. So what's the best strategy? Well, you're gonna do a lot of high damage. In like the stage 5, they will come 3 of them at once, and they will disable, and 3 of them can disable your units completely and do some high damage. But overall, good AoE or good possession is good enough to deal with them. Wicked Sisters and Goblin Zeppelin or Harassers can handle them with ease. Finally, we got the Megalodon. And this one is a mini boss, and much like other sharks, it can lifesteal on bite and has an insta kill, as you can see. And what this does is that it not only insta kills any unit, it can also insta kill heroes. So I recommend, if you're using melee heroes like Jigu or Grosh or Magosa or Varric, I recommend just avoiding them. Do as much like high damage as possible. They don't have any armor or magic resistance, and they're incredibly slow. But overall, do as high damage as you can, and that's about it. Forget about meleeing them. Finally, we got the Undead Pirates. And the first one we're looking at is the Risen Cutthroats. They do 45 to 80 damage and have like 200 health, much like the Recruits. And the interesting ability is that if there's mist or fog, they will gain speed. So you pretty much need to block them, and the Ghost stage pretty much introduces like, from the 4th stage, introduces fog sometimes, so you pretty much need to block them even with their high damage. But overall, just deal high damage. What do I expect? Next up we got the Corsair Cruiter, and these ones are like the range attack enemies. They don't have any magic resistance, despite the fact that they're basically mage enemies. But what they will do is revive any human pirates. They do pretty high damage for the range attack, and they can revive any pirate enemy. For regular unit, they can turn into like those ghost pirates, the risen cutthroats. While if there's like a bigger unit, like the boatswine, it will pretty much turn into their large ghost enemies, but I'll get to that later. So I pretty much recommend just killing them as fast as possible. They also do a lot low melee damage, so recommend using reinforcement or any melee hero towards them. Next up we got the ghostly Barge, and these are like flying enemies with high magic resistance and magic resistant aura, and they're pretty slow, but they're kinda tanky. If you have way too many magic units, it's not gonna do to them, but since they also get aura, they will also boost the magic resistance of other units. But if you got the harassers on the bone fingers, they're no big deal. Next up we got the four Catu, and these are like the armored flying enemies. So the growth stage only like has armored flying enemies, but regular ones don't. And these are like regular flying enemies with high physical resistance, so mages are pretty effective against them. They also got pretty low health, so you should fear them too much. Overall, just kill them. They're pretty tanky, but just kill them. And finally we got the Hand Captain, and these are arguably like the executioners. And much like the Megalodon, they also have an insta-kill ability, but what isn't listed is that they also create fog when they walk, which can be pretty tricky when you got the cutthroats. And besides, if they start killing your units, they also will turn into cutthroats, and they can also insta-kill heroes, so I'd be careful with them. Oh, and did I mention about the boatswine? Well, if he dies and the Corsair Cruiter starts to revive it, it will turn into the Hand Captain, so they can be pretty dangerous. But all you need to do is possess them. They can also insta-kill any unit, so they're pretty good as a possessed unit. But overall they're pretty tanky, but high damage or possession is good enough for dealing with them. Now then, let's move on to the bosses. And the first boss we're looking at is the Black Corsairs, the first pirate king. And this is the same Black Corsair that you saw from Stormato from Frontiers. You know, that pirate ship who throws bombs at these griffins. Now he's a boss, and he will constantly like shoot the cannonballs at your units at the first stage, even at your hero, so he's a constant hazard. But once you finish off all the enemies, he starts farting and shouting something, and then he starts to literally like bombard. He also has like a pretty fast attack speed, basically like Alric's Flurry. It does AoE and attacks pretty fast, but all you need to do is like block him and do high damage. He's basically like the standard enemies, and he's also incredibly tanky. So overall, just do high damage to it. Next up we got the Meakey, and he's pretty much like the second stage boss. And he pretty much is similar. He basically constantly taunts. Sometimes he puts your towers in sandcastles or throws rocks. But after you finish off all the enemies, he will spawn. He's pretty much like Kingpin. You can't block him, but you can do a lot of high damage. He can also block your screen and throw like a gorilla. Sometimes he can be sometimes very tricky to deal with, but all you need to do is do high damage. And maybe use the harassers and chip away his health. But overall he's kinda easy, as far as I could tell. Maybe not with 3 towers, but if you got like the volcano or the blazing gem, he goes down in no time. Next up we got the Deep King, and this is like the third stage shark stage. I'm not sure why he's not called the Grey White or something, but overall the Deep King is pretty much like the hardest bosses you come across. He has an insta-kill ability and he can heal. But not only that, he can also call some of his like units. And the worst ability is that he can also pretty much like destroy towers. So I recommend not like making too many expensive towers, but you need to make sure like you do high damage and block, and sometimes block him. But overall he's like one of the hardest boss. He also, and by the way, all the bosses will appear in the last stage, but I'll get to that. Finally we got the Spectra, and this is the first flying boss in the series. He does pretty decent damage. He has probably the highest health in Vengeance, and well, he pretty much just floats and bombards your units, so even though he's a flying boss, he can still stall it. He can still get stalled. Now, he will sometimes dispel your spells, much like the final boss from Origin's campaign, I mean. And sometimes he casts himself a shield that negates all damage, but overall just do high damage. He's incredibly slow. And that's really the thing about Spectra. Oh yeah, and he's pretty much like the twin brother for the Lucerne, the flying hero you get from this campaign. So that's a neat look. And finally we got Black Throne. You know, Black Throne from Frontiers. You know, this hero who gets a lot of money, who's the pirate. And in this stage he also introduces all the previous bosses, who now serve as like mini boss, or they're still technically bosses. Both the Black Throne and the Monkey appear like stage 5, while the Shark and the Spectre appear like stage 11. So you need to make sure that you're goodly prepared, but luckily for you they have low health. Now, if you got too much money in this stage, his parrot will steal, much like Bolger. He can also sometimes destroy props, depending on the progression. And once Black Throne finally appears, he can be a pretty challenging fight. He's probably much harder than Malek, as not only does he have he has pretty much like all the abilities what the previous bosses have. He can bombard your units, he can pretty much like fly, he can also destroy towers. So you need to pretty much be prepared, because he can be very tough and challenging. And he's also like the second like healthiest unit in Vengeance. So overall I recommend just being prepared for him, as he pretty much can bring a tough fight. So that's really about it, as I had to say. Now, moving on to the stages. And much like the Hammerhold DLC, it introduces five stages, so I'll get into that. Oh, and also, if you see this marking, remember to tap it. Not only do you get some gold, but it also gains some achievement. So you get to that. The first one I'm looking at is the Corsair's Brotherhood. Now, this is where the Corsair is the first stage and it introduces the Corsair. And if you can see these like houses, make sure to keep an eye around us. They're kinda like these houses you see from Hammerhold. They will spawn like enemies inside of them, so keep an eye on these. The second stage we're looking at is the Monkey Island. This is where the monkey boss appears and other monkeys. This first stage is the Shark Pool Reef. This is where the sharks appear. The fourth stage is the Skovrick Bay. This is where the ghost enemies appear. And finally is the Treasure Island. This is where Blackthorn is, and this is where there's gonna be a lot of different enemies from previous stages coming together. And this is where you're gonna be facing Blackthorn. So overall, what do I think of the Pirate Kings campaign? Well, when I think of it, it's kinda similar to Hammerhold, except that it introduces bosses constantly with different mechanics and all. He also introduces new towers and a new hero, despite how two of them are kinda OP. And for this campaign, it's a lot more challenging than Hammerhold. I'd say that the final boss is very difficult. Some players said that Malek was easy, but I would say that Blackthorn is a pretty difficult boss, and it gave me a pretty good challenge. I also like the enemies it introduces. So overall, what will my ratings be for this campaign? Well, I'm gonna give it 8.5 out of 10. It feels extremely like a Kingdom Rush campaign, and it's pretty much like one of the best DLCs Ironhide has released. Maybe if you're kinda disappointed with Hammerhold, this might be for you. But otherwise, if you don't wanna invest money on it, just don't buy it. But the enemies are at least fun and interesting. So anyways, that's about it all. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Oh, and stay tuned for the Kingdom Rush Alliance reviews I'm gonna be making. So I'll get to that later. Bye!
The kisses of the sun were sweet, I didn't blink, I let it in my eyes. Like an exotic drink, the radio playing songs that I have never heard. I don't know what to say. Oh, not another